The auctioneer dropped the gavel at $165, and the whole gravel lot at the Outagamie County, Wisconsin auction yard erupted into laughter. The man laughing the loudest stood under the tent in a navy double-breasted blazer with a gold pinky ring catching the late October sun. Vincent Kratiger ran the only modern recovery operation in 3 counties, and he had spent the preview walk-around telling anyone who would listen that the rusted 1958 Chevrolet Apache 38 with the home-welded boom on its bed was scrap iron. He had pointed to the word junk that someone had spray-painted across the driver's door in flaking orange and said the previous owner had told the truth for once. Now, a 24-year-old salvage mechanic named Owen Praht had outbid him for $165, and the slick-haired dealer was making sure the entire yard understood the joke. He called across the lot that the boy could keep his pile, that he wished him good luck pulling himself out of the ditch he had just driven into. The year was 2008. Owen did not answer. He walked through the gravel with his auction slip folded into his denim jacket, and he met his grandfather at the truck. Hubert Praht was 78 years old, a retired tractor mechanic who had worked his entire life on dairy equipment in the Green Hills west of Hortonville, and he wore a wool-felt buffalo plaid cap pulled low over white hair, a corn-cob pipe clenched unlit between his teeth, his eyes the color of pond water in November. He did not look at Vincent. He looked at the truck. He set one liver-spotted hand on the rusted fender and stood there a long minute without speaking. Then he said quietly, "Son, I think you bought yourself something." They winched the Apache onto Owen's flatbed trailer that afternoon, while Vincent Kratiger watched from his polished black recovery rig, and the slick-haired dealer made one final remark loud enough to carry across the gravel. He said that when the boy was ready to admit defeat, Kratiger Recovery and Towing would haul his scrap heap to the crusher for half price. Owen finished the chains without answering. His grandfather climbed slowly into the passenger seat of the trailer truck, and they pulled out of the yard and turned west on the county highway toward Hortonville, the dead Apache rocking behind them on its leaf-sprung axles, the home-welded boom pointing at the gray Wisconsin sky like a bent finger. On the drive, Hubert took the pipe from his teeth and looked at the side of his grandson's face before speaking. He said, "You know whose truck that was?" Owen said he did not know. The auction listing had said, "Estate sale, deceased owner, no records." Hubert nodded slowly. He said that was Gus Kaczmarek's truck. He hand-built the boom on it in his own yard in the summer of '79. The body shop in Kaukauna would not weld it for him, so Gus did it himself with a used stick welder from the lumber co-op. Owen asked who Gus Kaczmarek was. His grandfather looked at the road for a long while before he answered. He said Gus was a Polish boy, came over with his father after the war when he was 4. His father had been with the resistance, and the family lost everything. Gus grew up in Kaukauna and started a one-man logging operation by the Wolf River in '73. He married a Manitowoc girl named Teresa, and they had a son. Gus did everything himself. He felled the timber, limbed it, hauled it out on this Apache with the boom rigged for skidding. He worked alone. He saved every dollar. Hubert was quiet for a mile of highway. Then he said, Gus died in April of 1985. A chain snapped on a load, and a butt log rolled across him in his own clearing at 51. His boy Marek was 14. The truck went to auction with the rest of the equipment, and nobody bought the Apache because of the home-built boom. It ended up in a county impound lot, and somebody must have moved it later to that estate yard. He looked across the cab at Owen. He said, "You bought Gus Kaczmarek's truck. I don't think you bought scrap." They pulled into the long gravel drive of Hubert's farm just past 4 o'clock, and the late sun lit the Apache from behind as they backed it down off the trailer into the open bay of the barn that Hubert had used as his shop for 51 years. The truck sat under the rafters, weathered and tired, the junk paint flaking off the driver's door, the home-welded boom canted slightly from years of settled springs. Owen stood looking at it for a long time. His grandfather stood beside him with a pipeback between his teeth, and he said, "We will take her apart slow. We will not hurry. Whatever she has to tell us, she will tell us in her own time." The restoration began the next Saturday morning, and the restoration would last 16 years. Nobody knew that at the time. Owen worked his day job at a salvage yard in Appleton during the week and drove out to Hortonville every weekend. They started with the running gear because Hubert insisted on it. They pulled the inline six and tore it down on a stand and found the bearings good, the crank true, the head needing only a valve job. They pulled the 4-speed manual and pressed new bushings into the shift tower. The first winter went into the engine and into stories. Hubert told Owen about the dairy farms of his youth and about the men who used to bring their tractors to him in the 50s and 60s, men named Kaczynski and Bolt and Vanderwerf, who paid in cash and in cured ham and in cordwood split and stacked. He told stories about Gus, too, about the one time Gus brought the Apache to the barn in the summer of '82 to have a wheel cylinder pressed, and how Gus refused to leave until he had swept Hubert's shop floor in payment. They worked through that winter and the next summer, and the engine went back in the chassis in the autumn of the second year. Hubert was 80 and had slowed. Some Saturdays he sat by the wood stove and pointed with the pipe instead of climbing under the truck himself. Owen worked and listened. The framework took 2 more years. They sandblasted in sections and cut out rust and welded in patches 1 panel at a time. Owen's day job got busier in the 5th year, and the work paused for most of one winter. Hubert had a small stroke that February and was in the hospital in Appleton for 9 days. He came home thinner and a little slower, but his mind was clear. He told Owen that the truck would wait. They picked up again in the spring. The cab came off the frame in the 6th year. They cut out the rust from the floor pans, fabricated new ones from 20-gauge sheet, primed the underside, and hung the cab back on the frame in the 8th year. The home-welded boom they kept. Hubert insisted on it. He said the truck's whole story was in that boom, that to replace it would erase Gus Kaczmarek from his own work. They retrued the boom legs, greased the original hand winch, and painted the boom flat black. In the 10th year, Owen's mother passed in Madison, and the truck sat under a tarp for 4 months. In the 12th year, Hubert had cataract surgery and afterward told Owen the truck had been waiting for him to get his eyes back. They put the new windshield in that fall. Through all of it, Vincent Cradiger drove past the farm sometimes on his way to a job, the polished black recovery rig slowing on the county road, never quite looking up the drive, but never quite not looking either. The 15th year was paint. They wet-sanded, and they primed, and they laid down a deep, dark green that matched a faded photograph Hubert had of a similar truck from his own youth. They masked off the door panel where the orange junk paint still showed through, and they left it for now. Owen did not know why. He just left it. By the autumn of the 16th year, the Apache was nearly whole. They had not yet touched the headliner or the visors. The headliner was the last thing on the list, because Hubert always said, you start with what makes the truck move, and you finish with what makes the truck a home. On the morning of October the 11th of the 16th year, Owen drove out to Hortonville with a roll of new tan vinyl and a bag of replacement clips. He was 40 years old now. The gray at his temples had become a steady salt and pepper, and his hands had the thickness of a man who had spent a third of his life under hoods. Hubert was 94. He sat on his folding chair by the wood stove with a blanket over his knees and his pipe between his teeth, and watched as Owen climbed into the Apache's cab and pulled down the rotted original headliner. He took it down in long brittle sheets that crumbled into yellow powder in his hands. Then he reached up and he unscrewed the two original cardboard sun visors from their pivot brackets. He set them on the bench. He started to throw the driver's side visor into the burn pile, and he stopped. The visor was heavy, heavier than a piece of cardboard wrapped in vinyl had any reason to be. He turned it over in his hands. He held it up to the bare bulb in the rafters. The vinyl skin had pulled away from the cardboard backer along one stitched edge, and when he pressed the visor between his palms, he heard the soft slip of paper sliding against paper. He sat down on the workbench. Hubert lifted his pipe slowly from his teeth. He set it down on the arm of the chair, and he said, "What did you find?" Owen did not answer. He took a single-edge razor from the bench drawer, and he ran it carefully along the stitched seam of the visor, and he peeled the vinyl skin back from the cardboard like the skin of a piece of fruit. Between the two layers, hidden flat against the cardboard backer, were four objects. There was a packet of folded bills wrapped tight with a brown rubber band, 20s and 10s and 1980s paper, totaling $850. There was a single silver coin so tarnished it was nearly black, a 1944 Walking Liberty half-dollar, with the date barely visible through the patina. There was a faded color photograph showing a baby in a knit cap held in the arms of a dark-haired woman in front of a small wooden house, late sun in her hair. And there was a folded sheet of lined paper, the creases brittle, the ink slightly faded but legible. Owen unfolded it with hands that were not entirely steady. The handwriting was small and careful, and the letters slanted slightly to the right, the way men of that generation had been taught in country schools. The note was dated April 19th, 1985. It read, "If anything happens to me on the river, the money is for Marek. The coin is from my father, brought from Poznan in 1948. Tell my son the truck is his and the work was always for him. Gus." Owen sat on the bench and he read the note 3 times, and then he handed it without speaking to his grandfather. Hubert read it slowly. He took a long breath. He folded the note. Then he said quietly, "Gus wrote this 5 days before he died. The boy never knew. They drove out the next Saturday to Green Bay. Hubert had called a man he knew from the lumber co-op, who still kept track of the old families, and the man had given them a current address on the east side of Green Bay. They drove to a modest brick ranch on a quiet street, maples dropping leaves into the front yard, and they sat in the truck a long minute before walking up to the door. The man who opened the door was 53 years old. He had Gus Kaczmarek's heavy shoulders and his father's eyes. His name on the mailbox read Marek Kaczmarek, structural engineer, certified. He looked at the two strangers on his step, and he did not understand what they were doing there, and Hubert spoke first. Hubert said, "Son, I knew your father. He worked on his Apache in my barn in 1982. My grandson here bought the Apache at the estate auction up in Outagamie 16 years ago, and we have been restoring her ever since. And we found something inside her that belongs to you." Marek's face changed. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, and then he opened the door wide, and he asked them quietly to come in. They sat at his kitchen table, and Owen set the 4 items down one at a time on the placemat. The bills first, then the coin, then the photograph. He saved the note for last. Marek picked up the photograph. He held it for a long time, and his eyes filled, and he did not speak. He said finally that the woman in the picture was his mother, Teresa. She had died of cancer in 1991 when he was 20. He had no pictures of her from his baby years, not one. He had asked his aunt for years, and she had told him there were none. He turned the photograph over, and on the back, in his father's careful slanted handwriting, was a single line. Marek and Teresa, June 1972. He looked up at Owen and at Hubert, and he said, "Where was this?" Owen told him. He told him about the visor, and about the stitched seam, and about the cardboard backer. Marek listened, with his hands folded on the table. When Owen handed him the note, he read it twice. He did not cry until the second reading. Then he set the note down and picked up the silver coin, turning it slowly between his fingers. He said, "My grandfather came from Poznan in 1948. He carried this coin with him on the ship. He gave it to my father when my father turned 13. My father never told me where it went. We thought it had been sold during a hard year." He pressed the coin into his palm, and he closed his hand around it. He sat at the table with his eyes closed, and he did not speak for a full minute. Then he opened his eyes, and he asked if he could see the truck. They drove him out to Hortonville the next morning. Marek stood in the open bay of Hubert's barn in front of the Apache, and he walked slowly around it 3 times. He ran his hand along the home-welded boom. He stood at the driver's door where the junk paint was still flaking through the masking line. He looked at the bench. He looked at the visor that was still in pieces. He turned to Owen and he asked the price. He said he would pay whatever was owed. He would pay the auction money back and the restoration costs and a fair wage for 16 years of work. He said the truck should be his. Owen looked at his grandfather. Hubert took the pipe from his teeth. He looked at Marek for a long moment. Then he said, "The truck is yours, son, but not the way you mean. We are going to finish her. We are going to put the new headliner in, and we are going to paint over the door so the word junk is gone. And then we are going to drive her down to Kaukauna, where your father started his operation in 1973, and we are going to park her at the corner of County Road Chapua and the highway, where everybody who works in this county can see her, and we are going to paint your family name on the door." The boy paid $165 at auction. The truck is his on the paper. The work is his by the doing. But the name on the door belongs to your father and to your grandfather and to you. That is how it will go. They finished the Apache through that winter. Marek drove up from Green Bay every other weekend, and he worked alongside them in the barn. He learned to weld from Hubert. He learned to tune a carburetor from Owen. On the morning of June 14th of the 17th year, they rolled the Apache out of the barn under a clear blue Wisconsin sky, and they drove her in convoy down to the corner of County Road JJJ outside Kaukauna, where Gus Kaczmarek had run his one-man logging operation for 12 years. They parked her facing the highway. Owen handed Marek a small can of dark green paint and a 1-inch brush. Marek climbed up on the running board and he painted out the flaking orange junk on the driver's door. He waited an hour for the green to dry. Then he opened a can of gold lettering paint, and with the careful slanted handwriting he had inherited from his father, he painted across the door in clean, clear letters, Kaczmarek Logging. Established 1973. The work was always for him. He stepped down and he stood back. The four of them looked at the truck. A black recovery rig went by on the highway. Vincent Kratiger was driving. He slowed almost to a stop. He looked at the Apache parked at the corner with the dark green door and the gold lettering catching the morning sun. He looked at the four people standing on the gravel shoulder. He did not laugh. He did not say a word. He drove on. The Apache sits at the corner of County Road, JJ, and Highway 55 today, and the sign on the door reads, Kaczmarek Logging, established 1973. Marek Kaczmarek runs an annual summer reunion every June at that corner for the families of the loggers his father knew. Owen Praht runs his own salvage shop now outside Hortonville, and Hubert Praht still keeps the corncob pipe between his teeth and the wool felt cap pulled low over his eyes. The $850 sits in a small lock box at Marek's house. He has never spent it. The 1944 walking Liberty $50 sits beside it. The photograph of his mother is framed on the wall above his kitchen table. The note from his father is in a small fireproof safe in the basement. He reads it once a year on the 19th of April. If you ever see an old Apache parked at a Wisconsin crossroads with the words Kaczmarek Logging painted on the door in gold, slow down, roll the window down, and listen. There is a story in that truck that a man with a pinky ring tried to throw in the crusher for half price, and the work was always for the boy. Subscribe to Iron Hook Stories for a new story every day. Thank you for watching.